Welcome to 60 Minutes. Today I will be speaking with Vladimir Resnik, a Russian worker from the Petrograd Soviet. We will be discussing the effect of the rise of communism in Russia on the worker. Vladimir is an interesting person because he has lived through the Tsarist regime, participated in the revolution, and watched the rise of communism in Lenin. Hello Vladimir, how are you today?
I'm feeling great. It's awesome to be back from the dead.
Wonderful.
Yes.
The Tsarist reign was oppressive over the lower class and workers. Can you tell me about your experience prior to 1905?
Yeah, it was one of the most difficult periods of my life. I began working in the factories when I was really young, just like a teenager, and the conditions were terrible. I had to work 6 days a week for incredibly long hours, sometimes 11, 12 hours a day. The pay was low, and there were no safety requirements for the factory, so there's many dangerous machineries, and a lot of people got injured.
How did you feel towards the Tsarist regime at this time?
Well, I was very resentful and frustrated with the Tsars because they had the power to improve the terrible conditions that all of the workers and thousands and even millions of people in their country were suffering from by passing just simple reforms. But they just let it continue, and they did nothing.
On January 8, 1905, you and many other workers attempted to bring the issue of the workers to the Tsar's attention. Can you tell me about what you remember from that day?
I can. That was the very day that Father Georgy Gapin led a group of us workers to the Winter Palace. We marched towards the palace carrying religious icons, pictures of Nicholas II, and our grievances about the current conditions that we had to work in. We were not radical revolutionaries. We weren't violent. We were actually condemned by the Bolsheviks, who were like the revolutionary group, for not demanding enough from the government. All we wanted was some slight reforms to improve our conditions. We were not looking to overthrow the czars and the government. We just marched up to the palace. We were completely unarmed, very peaceful. But then the police opened fire for no reason. And I was shot in the shoulder. Hundreds of my friends and family members were killed. And the next thing I remember, I was just in a hospital bed.
This day has become known as Bloody Sunday. About 100 people were killed and several hundred more were injured. This day is considered to be the beginning of the active phase of the Revolution of 1905, causing strikes and uprisings throughout Russia. Tell me about your experience in the strikes.
Well, I was still recovering from my injury. I was in the hospital for much of the time. But I remember hearing the stories from friends and family that there were millions of workers all over the country who were striking to go against the government. And I remember that as people were striking, especially in the shipyards, because they knew that if no one was working in the shipyards and Russia, the country, couldn't export or import anything, then that would hurt the government the most.
All right, now moving forward to World War I, what was life for you and your family like during this time?
Well, life was incredibly difficult. The government took over absolutely everything. They controlled every aspect of our personal and private lives. I had to work 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, and the conditions were so terrible because we had to work with very dangerous machinery in order to make the huge weapons that were needed for the army, for their weapons. Also, I know from my brother, who was a farmer at the time, that the government had taken all the farmers' grain in order to feed the soldiers in the army and the rest of the country, and that left the peasants in a horrible situation because they lost their only source of making money. And also, on the topic of money, the government took control of all of our banks and essentially every industry, and so that made everybody incredibly mad at them.
So you seem to have been very, very unhappy with the situation in Russia during this time. What, if anything, did you do to try to change it?
Well, all the workers in Petrograd, or that's what it was called during the war, before it was called St. Petersburg, we decided we wanted to take a stand. And so in the capital, we united and we formed a sort of workers' union to organize strikes and riots, and mainly to give the workers a voice and a delegation to go against the oppressive monarchy. And the motto of our council of workers, comes straight from the Communist Manifesto. It is, "Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains." And that summarizes our desire to unite and to improve our conditions of working and life, and to form a capitalist system. And eventually, later on, we worked with the Bolsheviks and we gave them advice on how to take over the government.
So that was the October Revolution of 1917, and immediately after that, the Red Army was formed. Led by Trotsky, it fought against the whites or the supporters of the Tsarist regime. Tell me about your experience in the Red Army.
Well, I didn't join right at the beginning. It was completely based on volunteerism, but they weren't able to get enough volunteers to fight. So they had a draft, and I was conscripted into the army, and I went to fight World War I. And then some people in high Bolshevik command decided that they wanted to take over the government, so they called on a large group of soldiers from the Red Army, and we decided to come back and help in taking over the government. And us, along with all of the workers and peasants who made up the majority of the army, we were able to take over the government.
So once the Communist Party came into control of the country, they made changes replacing money with barter. And they created a new economic system called the NEP, the New Economic Policy. What were your feelings on these changes and the communist leadership your opinions on the communist leadership, and how the government changed your way of life?
Yeah, so when the money system was taken away by the government, what they did was they gave everyone coupons, and then you could go to government stores and turn those in for food and any other essential. And so my family was not in a great situation economically during the war, and we were often starving. But this change didn't really improve or even change our lives very much. I mean, it gave us a little bit more food, but it just frustrated us because we weren't doing any better. But now the government had absolute control over every part of our life because they controlled how or when or if we got food or blankets or anything necessary to live.
And what about the NEP?
Well, the NEP was really great for all of the working class families because we could finally make money for ourselves and not just be completely controlled by the government. The allowance of just a little bit of small capitalism was really good for me and my family because we could finally see our hard work pay off in revenue. And it was different from anything we'd ever experienced before, and it motivated us to push ourselves to be the best we could and better than we had been, and that let us live and lead a much better way of life.
Vladimir Reznik survived the Russian Revolution from its start, participating in the most important movements, rallies, strikes, and wars that led to the rise of communist Russia. It has been a pleasure having him on the show today. Thank you.